You know, a reoccurring theme for these modeling videos is I forget to record some details while I'm working. Fortunately, these details are usually pretty small. Not today. I forgot to get a picture of the car before we started modifying it. Thankfully, I did grab a picture of the parts we painted off camera before we actually painted them, and the brown base you see me painting in the background right now is actually unchanged compared to how we got it. I'll explain that last point in a little bit. It was repainted before we got it. It's unfortunate I didn't get a photo of everything still together, but at least we have some idea of how every piece looked on its own. So, why did I not get a picture? Well, it was a hasty mistake. We were preparing to spray paint a boxcar frame to experiment with paint colors and decaling techniques on the whole of the car. I figured we could paint the frame and trucks on this flat car the same color as the boxcar's frame, since their current colors were gaudy, and the Model Flex weathered black we were going to use was a nice choice for the underside of the car. Since spray painting is something I need my dad to do for me, and he was already ready to paint, I quickly took apart the car so he could spray paint the parts. Before I had him do that, though, I realized my mistake and took a picture of the frame and trucks before handing them off to my dad. I didn't record the spray painting because we were in the middle of recording the 5,000 subscriber special, and I had just recorded him airbrushing the boiler and water tanks on Snickerdoodle. I thought that was enough for some reason. Anyways, my failures aside, you can see the frame and the trucks in the background here. I was right. The weathered black does look good. It's more gray than black, but whatever, I'm not the one who names the paints. As for the main car body, I started covering the sides in Americana Burnt Umber, as it was the closest color match to the brown that was already painted on, and I still needed to cover over some small spots of red that were showing through the paint. For the top, I covered it in some Model Flex Armor Sand. This car was originally a tacky Budweiser Christmas train of some kind. However, its previous owner and community member, TK Productions, started repainting it by hand. Props to you, TK. That is no easy task. I definitely learned that the hard way while working on this car, and wish we had coated it in some primer before I got to work. But the old coat of paint made my life way easier while painting the sides, as I didn't need to worry quite so much about the red showing through. However, my choice of paint for the top of the flat car was a mistake. It just made the issue worse. See, the Model Flex Armor Sand was brand new and hadn't been mixed properly, and wasn't really covering very well. I would have used a paint mixer. I know we have one in the house somewhere, but I don't know where it is, and at the time I was recording this, my dad was asleep and I didn't want to bother him, and I was impatient. Not a great combination. To replace the armor sand, I painted over the top with some Ceramicoat Territorial Beige. It was a bit darker in tone, but rather similar. It was covering way better and looked as good, if not better, than the armor sand. Soon enough, the top was finished. I pushed it off to the side to dry. While I waited for the paint to dry, I took a strip of wood I had grabbed from my father's collection and started cutting it into approximately 1-inch segments, which is roughly 4 feet in O scale. The flat car had stake pockets, which seemed like an invitation for me to make my own stakes and add them in. Don't worry, I did test fit these pieces before I started cutting to make sure they were small enough to fit in the stake pockets, but big enough to get stuck and not just slip right out. Once the 12 stakes were ready and the paint had mostly dried, I started pushing them into position. I didn't bother making them level with one another. A little bit of inaccuracy just adds to the look of the car. Next, I worked on restoring one major detail that had been broken off before we even got the car: the handbrake. My father ordered these titchy 16 scale inch brake wheels a while back, as this flat car isn't the only car in our collection that's missing a brake wheel. To make the brake shaft, I cut a piece of wire we had laying around. My first cut wound up flying across the room since I was holding onto the bigger piece while the smaller piece got more momentum from the cut. That was a small mistake, but instead of trying to find that needle in a haystack, I just cut a new piece while holding onto the shorter end, which worked much better. The shaft was around 5/8 of an inch long, or roughly 2.5 feet in scale. I wanted the brake to be around 2 feet tall, and left some wiggle room as I needed to thread the shaft through the brake wheel and poke it into the base of the car, which would eat up some of the space. To get the brake to stay in place, I poked a small hole with an awl where it was supposed to go, and applied a little canopy glue to the base of the brake. A little black paint later, and presto, it's looking good. It's a little bit crooked when you really look at it, but I think it's fine. I think it's passable. As the brake settled in, I started painting the stakes territorial beige like the flatbed. Gotta make things consistent, after all. I used the opportunity to cover up any major blemishes on the top of the car. The car's looking pretty good already, but there is another important thing we need to do: add decals. This is gonna be for my model railroad, right? I want it to have my railroad name. Little side note, thank God I changed the camera angle before doing this step, because I just know my hands would have gotten in the way with the old camera angle. I've shown this process off before, but only once and with the kinda shoddy camera angle, so let's do it again with a little more clarity, hopefully. With waterslide decals, you want to cut them out so just the details you want, and maybe some transparent fluff around the outside, remains. And then you dip it in water for at least 10 seconds, but no more than, say, 2 minutes. While it's soaking, cover the spot you want to put the decal on with some microset. Once you remove the decal from the water, be careful about touching the front side. It's called a waterslide decal for a reason. It slides off of the paper after being put in some water for a bit. So, carefully maneuver the decal to over the microset spot, facing away, then hold one finger on one end of the decal and use your other hand to gently pull the paper out from underneath. You probably won't get the decal on just right at first. That's okay. Using a soft paintbrush, cover the decal in some more water to keep it sliding around, and then gently brush it around to try and move it into position. Once it is, use the same brush to gently apply microsol. I personally just soak the brush in microsol, put it on the decal, don't move it, and then lift it off and repeat until every position of the decal has been covered. It's really important to remain patient with this and to only decal one side at a time. While I didn't record it, I was too impatient with the other side of the car, and when grabbing the car to move it, I accidentally grabbed the still drying decals on the other side, ripping them off with my fingers. I think I did this like 5 times. Fortunately, I was able to salvage all the decals I ripped off, but hey, do as I say, not as I do, because my impatience has been one heck of a problem throughout this whole episode. Be patient, especially with decals. After the decals had dried on after like a day, all that was left to do was to cover them with a lacquer-based dull coat. Yeah, it's spelled kinda weird. We did this to help protect the decals, since they're still pretty fragile even if they are attached to the car now. We did this outside, as the smell is pretty unpleasant and it's kinda toxic. We also did a tender for another project at the same time. Hopefully the video for that will be out in a week or two. And bam, that's it. We're done. I really do wish I had a before and after picture for this project though, because it is kind of wildly changed. You could see so much of the red and like the gold trucks on it, and there were no stakes, but whatever. I'm still proud of how this turned out, and we'll have to settle for just putting it next to the experiment boxcar that I mentioned in passing earlier. I really like how this turned out. It was a small mess to make, but it's turned out really good in the end, and is a great start to our freight fleet for the Willamette and Port Caroni Model Railroad project for this channel. It sets a nice standard for what I should try and hold myself to going forwards with this project. That's all I've got for you today, though. I will see you all soon enough with the next part of the project, whatever that may be. It's probably going to be the new locomotive, and it's also likely available to watch for all channel members already. I do need to get to work on the layout benchwork soon, though. I gotta have a place to run all these cool trains we're making. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in. Cheers, folks.